You asked why the body moved, and I never told you everything. The pump was already running when I noticed the sound change. That soft, steady hum you stop hearing after a few years. The room was steel gray hospital blue and fluorescent white. It was 2:11 a.m. in a funeral home outside Dayton, Ohio. And the tubing made that tiny tick-tick against the stainless tray. I had the case on my prep table zipped and tagged from the cooler. Male, late 60s, hospital transfer. No trauma listed. Core temperature read 38 degree box on the surface probe. The cooler was set at 36 degree Fahrenheit, which is standard for us. Livor was settled low on the back and calves dark and fixed. Rigor was moderate in the jaw and shoulders not fully locked. That timing matters, even if nobody thinks it does. Rigor doesn't show up like a light switch. You get a window, then you get a problem. And this case still felt inside the window. I checked the paperwork and the wristband again. Time of death, 7:42 p.m. Time received, 10:06 p.m. Time on my table, 2:09 a.m. We were well past the obvious, but not past the rules. That's what I believed right up to the next detail. His wedding ring sat tighter than I expected. Not stuck, but snug like someone gained weight overnight. The skin at the knuckles looked a little stretched. I told myself the same thing I tell myself every week. Edema can happen. Still, I stared at it 2 seconds longer than normal. I pulled on nitrile gloves and set my instruments in order. Aneurysm hook, curved hemostats, scalpel with a fresh blade, arterial tube set medium size, drainage forceps, ligature ties. The bottle of arterial fluid was already mixed at 2% index. 2 gallons warmed slightly because cold fluid moves slower. Everything was routine, which is exactly why it bothered me later. The pump kept its calm rhythm as I made the femoral incision. One clean cut, then blunt dissection with my fingers. Femoral artery, femoral vein, they sit close like they're hiding together. I slid the arterial tube into the artery and tied it down. I opened the vein for drainage controlled and wide enough. The first rush was dark and familiar. If you've never done this, you think it's dramatic. It isn't. It's a controlled exchange pressure for flow for preservation. I watched the gauge sit around 8 to 10 psi steady. I listened for gurgles sputter or that hollow hiccup in the line. That's how you know you have air where you shouldn't. At 2:23 a.m., the drainage slowed, then steadied again. That small resistance shift can mean a clot or a kink or nothing. I adjusted the cannula angle by a few millimeters. The tubing ticked against steel again, like a metronome. That's when my breath hitched once without permission. Not from fear, from a thought that didn't fit the room. Because the ring still looked too tight, and his fingers still looked too full. You can tell yourself it's fluid shift. You can tell yourself it's hospital IVs and gravity. Then you see the hand and you stop talking to yourself. People who work near the dead learn one rule fast. We don't react to the sight. We react to the contradiction. And contradictions don't announce themselves with a scream. They show up as a detail you can't unsee. I kept working anyway. I always keep working. That's how you keep the job and your sanity. The pump hummed. The gauge stayed steady. The room stayed cold and bright. At 2:31 a.m., I shut the pump down. I clamped the line, closed the stopcock, and waited. I watched for rebound pressure, which can happen in bad positioning. There was none. The drainage had done what it does. The exchange was complete. I reached for my suture kit to close the femoral site. 2 simple stitches, nothing fancy. And as I pinched the skin edges together, I saw it. One finger flexed, slow, not a twitch, not a jerk. A flex with tension, then release. The movement wasn't big, but it had weight. It looked like the finger chose to do it. That's the part that makes your stomach go quiet. I froze for half a second. My jaw clenched hard enough to hurt. Then I did what professionals do when reality misbehaves. I looked for the simplest explanation that lets me continue. Post-mortem reflex, I said mostly to myself. Short words, flat tone. My hands went back to work like nothing happened. Then the finger flexed again. Not repeated fast, not random. Just once more like a test. I didn't step back. I didn't call anyone yet. I didn't want a crowd in my prep room at 2:32 a.m. Crowds don't help. They make things into stories. I wanted it to be a mistake. I glanced at the hand again and noticed the nails. Not growing, not changing, but looking freshly trimmed. Like someone cared about them recently. That shouldn't matter. It did. I heard footsteps in the hallway outside the prep room. My assistant Mike was on the schedule with me that night. He wasn't a kid, but he was still new to embalming. He had the kind of face that shows every thought. He walked in, took one look, and stopped breathing for a beat. "What's wrong?" he asked. Nothing, I said. That was my first lie of the night. Mike came closer eyes on the femoral site, then the hand. He saw the fingers before I could warn him. His mouth opened like he was about to speak. Then the index finger flexed again, slow and clean. Mike's face drained of color. He whispered, "Stop. Please. This isn't right." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I just kept suturing. "Residual nerve discharge," I said. "After drainage," Mike asked. "Sometimes," I answered. That sometimes was a second lie, and I knew it. Because sometimes is what you say when you don't have a rule. And I had rules. I had a whole profession built on them. Mike backed up one step, then another. He held his hands close to his chest like he was cold. The room was cold, but that wasn't why. "No," he said. "Just no." He turned and left the prep room. The door didn't slam. It clicked shut like an office door. And that click landed in my head harder than the finger movement, because it meant I was alone with the contradiction. I told myself to finish the closure and move on. That's what you do. You finish the step you're on. You don't improvise. You don't spiral. I tied the final knot and cut the suture end short. I wiped the skin clean and placed a small pad over the incision. I checked the arterial tube and removed it carefully. No backflow, no pressure rebound, no sign of a leak. Everything looked correct. I watched the hand for 10 seconds. Nothing happened. Then the finger flexed once more, smaller this time, like it was running out of power. That thought irritated me in a way I didn't like. Power. Like it was a machine. I felt one sharp frustration, clean and ugly. Not anger at the body. Anger at the fact that my brain was reaching for nonsense. I exhaled through my nose and forced my voice back to neutral. I looked at the cooler thermometer on the wall. 36 degrees, steady. I looked at the clock. 2:39 a.m. I looked at the paperwork again like paper could fix biology. No circulation, no oxygen delivery, no glucose use, no ATP production in living muscle, let alone here. That's the expectation. That's the safety line. And the line had just bent. Here's the part nobody believes when you tell it later. Not the movement, the calm. Because the system around death is built for calm. Hospitals, funeral homes, forms, tags, timers. If you say a body moved, people hear panic. They don't hear procedure. No one believes us, not really. They believe the paperwork. They believe the rules. They believe the world stays consistent. I opened the case file in our software and typed like I always do. Date, time, case number, condition, cosmetics requested. I noted moderate rigor, fixed live ore, and normal drainage. I typed edema noted at ring finger because that was true. Then I hesitated over one blank line. I didn't type movement. I didn't type flexion. I didn't type contraction. I told myself I didn't need to. I logged it as nothing. Because nothing is what should happen next. I printed the tag, slid it into the sleeve, and walked the case back. The hallway lights were warmer than the prep room. The contrast made my eyes ache. At the cooler, I paused with my hand on the handle. That's when I noticed the ring again in my mind. Tight. Too tight. I had one thought I didn't want to own. What if the timing was wrong? I didn't open the bag. I didn't check the face. I didn't do anything dramatic. I just stood there listening to the building, the HVAC hiss, the distant hum of the compressor, and somewhere in my memory, the tubing's tiny tick-tick on steel. I closed the cooler door and latched it. I wrote the transfer time on the sheet in block letters. Then I washed my hands until the water ran cold. Later, when you ask me what happened after, I'll tell you. But I need you to understand this first. The worst part wasn't the movement. The worst part was how easily I filed it away, how quickly I reached for words like reflex and discharge, how comfortable the system is with anything that keeps us working. Because not everything that stops breathing stays still. You asked why the finger moved after drainage. This is the part I left out. The tick-tick was back faint in the tubing as I slid the trocar tray closer. Steel gray counters, blue prep lights, white tile that never looks clean. It was 2:46 a.m. when I unhooked the aspirator line. The cooler read 36° Oscar behind me. The body surface probe still read 38° harasts at the sternum. I didn't reopen the femoral site. I didn't recheck the ring. I told myself to finish the case like a professional. That was my mistake. Cavity treatment is the part people don't talk about. Arterial embalming looks tidy on TV. Cavity work is suction pressure and patience. It's where you find out what the paperwork missed, and where you learn what normal actually feels like. I set the trocar tip on the sterile pad and checked my bottle. Cavity fluid 16 ounces mixed to the label spec. I run it through the gravity injector, not the pump. Too much pressure ruins everything. Too little leaves you with purge later. Rigor was still moderate in the jaw. Liver stayed fixed along the back and thighs. Nothing about those signs suggested motion. That's what made the next thing so wrong. I positioned the body with a shoulder block. Chin up, arms aligned, a small towel under the wrists to keep them neutral. That's standard in our shop in Ohio. It prevents odd postures when the family views. I paused once longer than I meant to. Just a hesitation. My eyes went to the right hand. The ring finger still looked tight. Then I started. Trocar entry is 2 inches above the navel. Angle down first, then sweep up under the diaphragm. Short motions, controlled. You listen for the tone change in the aspirator. That wet hiss tells you you're in the right pocket. At 2:52 a.m., the suction pulled clean. No clog, no sudden resistance. The line made that soft tick-tick again against the tray edge, and I caught myself counting it like it mattered. Here's your first question. Why would I count anything in a room like that? Because I didn't want to look at his hand, and because people who work near the dead learn to use routine as armor. We don't do it for comfort. We do it so we can keep moving. I continued the sweep. Heart area, lungs, upper abdomen. Each pocket has its own feel. Every embalmer knows it. A light drag, a clean slip. No spring, no tone, just tissue. Then the trocar met resistance in a place it shouldn't. It wasn't a blockage. It wasn't a rib. It felt like tension, like the wall pushed back a little. I adjusted my angle by a few degrees and kept going. One short push. The resistance vanished. That could happen. Fat shifts, tissue collapses. Normal explanations exist. Then his forearm tightened. Not a twitch. A tightening against gravity like someone bracing. The wrist rose a half-inch off the towel, held, then settled. Slow, controlled, clean. My breath hitched once, just once. I didn't say anything out loud, because there's a rule I've lived by for years. If you name it too early, it becomes real. I watched the arm for 5 seconds. Nothing moved. I went back to work. I aspirated the lower abdomen again. A short sweep, then a second sweep. Exactly 8 seconds after the tip passed the diaphragm, the forearm tightened again. Same lift, same hold, same settle. That delay hit me harder than the motion, because random things don't keep the same timing. Patterns do. I stepped back and stared at the hand. The ring finger looked slightly paler than the others. Not blue, not purple. Just blanched, like pressure was being applied from inside. Edema can happen, I told myself. Except edema doesn't time itself. I glanced at the clock. 2:58 a.m. I checked the cooler gauge again. 36 degrees. I checked my own injector bottle. Nothing spilled, no leaks, no external force, no vibration. I set the trocar down and called for my supervisor. His name was Ron. He'd been in funeral service longer than I'd been alive. He moved like someone who had stopped being surprised. He looked in from the doorway, not fully stepping inside. "Everything okay?" he asked. "The arm's moving," I said. Ron stared at the body for 2 seconds. Nothing moved on cue. He gave me the look I've seen 100 times. The look that says, "Don't turn this into a story. It's just gas," he said. "Keep working." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue like a scared person. I just answered flat. Gas doesn't contract in sequence. Ron's face tightened. He didn't ask what I meant. He didn't want the answer. "Finish the case," he said. Then he left. The door closed, and the lock clicked. That click wasn't loud. It was final. It said, "You're on your own with this. Here's the part that hurts to admit. That's the moment I knew nobody would back me up. Not because they didn't care, because caring doesn't fit the system. We run on timelines, not doubts. No one believes us when we describe a violation like this. They believe the paperwork. They believe the process. They believe the world stays consistent." I picked up the trocar again. I resumed aspiration, but slower. One pocket at a time. Short sweeps. I counted the seconds without meaning to. 6, 7, 8. The forearm tightened on 8. I stopped. I stepped away. Nothing moved. I leaned in again and touched the wrist with 2 gloved fingers. Tactile brief. The skin was cold. Dry in the way refrigerated skin gets after a few hours. No warmth, no pulse, no tremor. I removed my hand. The wrist rose a half-inch, not as a reflex to touch, as if the muscle had waited for permission. My jaw clenched so hard my molars ached. I didn't blink for a full second. Then I did the only thing I could do without losing control. I went back to the tools. I switched trocar tips, a smaller diameter, sharper bevel. Sometimes resistance is just a bad angle. Sometimes you fix the tool and the problem disappears. The first sweep felt normal. The aspirator hissed. Fluid moved like fluid should. Then the line pulsed. Not from the machine, from inside the body. It was a brief push of backflow into the clear tubing. A short, visible surge. Then it stopped. Backflow without pressure is not supposed to happen. Not like that. I felt one clean flash of frustration, sharp and ugly. Not fear. Annoyance that the rules were breaking quietly. Annoyance that I couldn't prove it to anyone. "Come on," I muttered. That was it. One moment. Then I shut my mouth again. I set the trocar down and checked the basics, like a checklist. Time since death over 7 hours. Rigor, moderate progressing. Liver fixed dependent areas. Temperature cooler stable at 36 second half, body surface 38 degrees. Arterial pump off. Lines clamped. No circulation. In living muscle, contraction requires ATP. ATP requires metabolism. Metabolism requires oxygen or substrate. There was none. So why was the arm timing itself? I forced myself to continue, because the worst disasters happen when you stop mid-step. I switched from aspiration to injection. Cavity injection is slow. You don't flood, you distribute. I connected the injector and opened the valve slightly. A controlled flow, steady, no pulse. The moment the first ounces went in, the right hand clenched. Not the fingers flexing like before. The whole hand. Full closure. Knuckles whitening under cold skin. It held for 2 seconds. Then it released. No rebound, no tremble. Just open again, flat and wrong, like a decision reversed. I stood there frozen. Not because I thought it would sit up. Because the movement was too clean. If you've ever watched someone grip a rail in pain, you know the difference. That wasn't spasm. That was control without a controller. I stepped back and stared at the wrist, the forearm, the elbow. No other movement. Just that single, complete cycle. Here's your second question. If it's gas, why does it look like intent? I closed the injector valve and waited. 10 seconds. Nothing. I opened it again for a fraction of a turn. The hand clenched again. 2 seconds. Release. Same timing, same force, same finish. I shut the valve and swallowed once. My throat was dry. The room felt smaller than it was. I checked the case tag again, like the name would change. It didn't. I checked the time. 3:17 a.m. I checked the cooler temp again. Still 36 degrees. I looked toward the door Ron had closed behind him. And for the first time that night, I understood what the click meant. It meant the system had already made its choice. Keep working, keep quiet, keep moving. Before I tell you what happened next, ask yourself something simple. What would make you leave the room? Because I didn't leave. I stayed. I tightened my gloves. I picked up the trocar again, and the tubing started its soft tick-tick against the tray like it was counting with me. Not everything that stops breathing stays still. You asked what happened after the hand clenched twice. I didn't leave the room. The tick-tick in the tubing kept time with the clock. Steel counters, blue-white light, my gloves pale against gray skin. It was 3:22 a.m. when I shut the cavity injector again. The cooler stayed at 36 degrees. The body surface probe still read 38 degrees. I stood there listening, not for a sound from the body, for a mistake in my own process, because mistakes are safer than patterns. I did the next step like a checklist. Trocar down, valve closed, line clamped. I wiped the trocar with gauze and set it in the tray. I swapped gloves. Fresh pair. That's habit, but it's also control. Then I did something I rarely do mid-case. I checked the face. The eyes were closed. The lids had that slight tack from cold storage. The jaw was still in moderate rigor, not locked. Liver stayed fixed along the back. Nothing about the expression suggested anything. That's the micro-reveal that bothered me. If a body is active, you expect other signs. There were none. I went back to the right arm. I lifted the wrist 2 inches and let it settle. Dead weight falls the same way every time. This wrist didn't fall wrong. It fell exactly right. My breath hitched once. I hated that it did. I checked temperature again. 38 degrees at the sternum. I checked the room thermometer. 67 degrees. I checked time since death, over 7 hours. I checked rigor timing in my head, like a lecture. Early, peak, resolution. This was still in peak range. Still. Peak rigor doesn't coordinate. It locks. It doesn't choose. I stepped back. I waited 10 seconds. Nothing moved. Then I leaned in and touched the wrist with 2 fingers. Cold, dry, slight tack at the glove contact. No give, no heat, no pulse. I removed my hand. The forearm tightened, not the whole arm. Just the flexor line, elbow to wrist like a band drawing in. It held for a beat, then released. I touched it again. Tighten, hold, release. I stopped touching. Nothing. That's when the movement stopped being movement. It became a response. It felt like the tissue was answering a question I didn't ask out loud. I didn't say anything. I didn't call Mike. Mike had already left my shift earlier. I could picture his face when the finger moved, and I could picture him refusing to walk back in. People who work near the dead know this feeling, not fear, recognition, the moment your body realizes the rules aren't in charge. I tried one more controlled test. I touched the wrist. Tighten, hold, release. I touched the forearm higher. Tighten, hold, release. Then I touched the bicep. The bicep tightened first, then the forearm, then the hand. Proximal to distal, top to bottom. Like a clean sequence through anatomy. That sequence is the thing I can't explain away. Random twitches don't travel like that. Gas doesn't travel like that. Reflex arcs don't work without a system to carry the signal. I stepped back. The arm went still. I leaned in again slower. I touched the bicep with the back of my glove. Bicep. Forearm. Hand. 3 contractions. Same order. Same timing. Then nothing. My jaw clenched so hard I tasted metal. I didn't move for a second. Then I did what I should have done earlier. I documented the objective basics, not the story. Time marker 3:31 a.m. Body temp 38 degree off. Cooler set point 36 degree area. Rigor moderate jaw and shoulders. Livor fixed dependent posterior. I wrote those down on my prep sheet in block letters, not because they would help, because they would anchor me. I tried to force a rational path. I checked my arterial index bottle. 2%, same as always. I checked cavity fluid lot number and expiration. Within date. Normal vendor. I checked the suction unit. No pressure fluctuation. I checked the injector valve. No pulse. Everything outside the body was stable. Everything inside the body was not. I picked up the trocar again, not to continue, to see if tool contact changed the response. I laid the trocar tip gently on the abdominal wall. No entry, just touch, nothing. I pressed slightly like palpation. The bicep tightened. Forearm followed. Hand clenched. I released pressure. The arm relaxed in the same order. Hand, forearm, bicep. That was the reveal that turned my stomach cold. Because it wasn't just movement now. It was coordinated input and output. My throat went dry. I swallowed once. That was all the emotion I allowed. I stepped to the door and opened it 2 inches. The hallway was warm light and silence. Ron's office was down the hall, door cracked. I knocked once. Ron didn't look up when he spoke. "What?" "I need you in here," I said. Silence. Then finish the case. "It's not gas," I said. Ron exhaled like I was wasting his time. "Don't write anything weird," he said. Then he added quieter, "Don't document movement." That line landed like a procedural order, not a suggestion, not concern, policy. I closed the door and stood there with my hand on the knob. For a second, my fingers felt slow to curl, just a fraction late. I stared at my own glove like it might explain something. That was my first real fear. Not for the case. For the boundary between the case and me. I went back to the table. I didn't touch the arm again. I finished the work the way Ron wanted it done. Quiet, standard, efficient. I closed the trocar entry with a small suture. 1 stitch, cut, done. I applied a sealing powder at the incision. A little internal slang we use is button it. Make it presentable. Make it final. At 3:49 a.m., the body went back into the bag. Zipper up, tag visible. I moved the gurney down the hall alone. The wheels squeaked once over a grout line. In the cooler, I slid the case into Bay 4. The tray rails caught, then seated with a metallic click. I latched it. I didn't look at the hand. Then I did something I almost never do. I wrote a separate note on scrap paper, not in the file, not in the system. Sequence, touch dependent. Prox, distal, delay, consistent. I folded it and put it in my wallet. Because here's the emotional void nobody talks about. If you put it in the report, you become the problem. If you don't put it in the report, you become complicit. No one believes us when we describe a biological violation. They believe the checklist. They believe the form fields. They believe the word completed. The next day, Mike asked to switch shifts. He didn't say why. He didn't have to. A week later, Ron handed me my prep sheets with red pen marks. Not corrections, reminders. Keep it clean, he said. Keep it normal. 2 weeks after that, I was filing old case numbers in the back office. Boring work, dusty boxes, Tennessee transfers, Pennsylvania hospice deaths, stacks of paper that smelled like dry glue. I found a prep sheet from another embalmer. Different name, different funeral home, same state. A margin note caught my eye. Hand response after injection. Delay consistent. Do not document. Same phrasing, same kind of shorthand. Same fear hiding inside a neutral sentence. That was the theory bait detail that changed everything. Because it meant I wasn't alone. And if I wasn't alone, it wasn't a fluke. It was a pattern. Months passed. Cases came and went. I stopped working solo on night shifts. I stopped touching arms unless I had to. I let assistants do the drainage when they insisted they could. 3 months later, I noticed my grip was slower. Not weaker, just delayed. I stared at my hand in the sink at work, water running. The glove creased a beat after I decided to squeeze. And for the first time, I understood why Ron didn't want it written down. Because if the line between still and alive can blur even once, then the system doesn't just fail the dead. It can fail anyone. We say death begins when circulation stops. That night I learned muscle doesn't always agree. Not everything that stops breathing stays still. If this story stayed with you longer than it should, give the video a like. Not for me. For the people who work these rooms alone at night. If you know someone in healthcare, mortuary work, or emergency services, share this with them. And if you've ever seen a body do something it wasn't supposed to do, leave a comment. I read everyone. Because some things don't belong in official reports. Subscribe if you want the next file. I haven't closed this case.